I've been shooting with Fujifilm cameras for quite a while now, and I've come to appreciate their design and image quality. Recently I picked up a compact Fujifilm camera and I was very excited to try it out. Now the photos did not quite end up how I imagined though. So the camera I found is the Fujifilm X-20, or maybe I should pronounce it as the EX-20, because there is an X-20 as well, a bit later camera, a bit more advanced one. And that camera is actually a Fujifilm camera. I'm not entirely sure about this one, but in any case, let's have a closer look at the camera. The build quality is very cheap, it's very plasticky and light, and not in a good way. It feels kind of like a film disposable camera. It has 2-something megapixels, and strangely it's not written anywhere on the camera, not the front, not the bottom, not anywhere really. So maybe at the time it was not so much to brag about. It has a fixed lens at 9.9mm, and the batteries it uses are AA batteries, like it works with like standard rechargeable batteries just fine. For storage you can either use the 8MB internal or a smart media card. So well, basically it has what you need in a basic Digicam. There's also a flash and a small viewfinder on the back. In the menus you have some presets as well, so some things to experiment with. The screen is very dark, it's kind of difficult to compose your photos in it actually. So fortunately there is the optical viewfinder, because otherwise this camera would be very difficult to use to see what you're doing. Also reviewing the photos becomes kind of difficult, but I guess you have to live without the knowledge of exactly how the photos turned out when you shoot them. Okay, there we have the menus. They are kind of difficult to view in daylight, but there are some different settings. You can do exposure, compensation, there are scene modes, like a few different scene modes. I don't have the card in it right now, no files, so let's take a photo here of the forest behind me. Is it even visible? Like, okay, so let's take this photo here. It's using the internal memory now, and can check it. Yeah, it sort of shows what you get. There's one a bit unexpected, strange feature on this camera. You can remove this front, like if you open here, and if you press here where it's written press, you can pull off the front of the camera. I have no idea what the purpose of this is. I mean, you could, I guess, attach some different lenses here. I mean, there's no glass in this outer part, there's only the lens here. It's very strange. There are some scratches on the camera because I dropped it by mistake on very hard concrete, and to my surprise there was like no actual damage to the camera. It still works just as it should. So the build quality isn't total crap after all. So this camera really isn't anything special, and it definitely does not feel like a Fujifilm camera. And surprise surprise, when I got home and opened the EXIF data, it shows that it's not actually made by Fujifilm. It's made by a company called Concord Corporation, and the brand name of the camera is Concord 2000. I searched for more information about the company, Concord Camera as they are actually called, and it turns out it was a United States-based company that produced cheap cameras in China. And among those cameras they produced well, basic point-and-shoot 35mm cameras, as well as disposable cameras under the Polaroid brand. And well, this of course explains the disposable feel of the EX-20 as well. They had actually quite a selection of different digital cameras as well, but they don't seem to have been very successful with them. The reviewers didn't really like them, even though they were pushing a new technology like the first camera with wireless file transfer. They seem to have stopped their production of Digicams in about 2006 or so. At least on their website no new Digicams come after that. On their website their Digicams are branded with their own name. So how come the one I found is branded as Fujifilm? Well, they somehow managed to convince Fujifilm to license their brand name for selling these cameras. Maybe it was only done for certain markets, like in Europe, since the box I have for this camera has European localization on it. Licensing brand names is nothing unusual, of course, but still I'm a bit surprised that Fujifilm agreed to put their name on this camera, because It definitely has the potential to damage the brand name, or had at the time. If this was my first Fujifilm camera, I'm not so sure I would go with the brand again. At this point I could just have taken the smart media card, put it in my S2 Pro and call it a day. But I was actually very curious about the photos this camera would produce. Sometimes it can be quite interesting to use, let's say, bad and cheap cameras. You can be very surprised by them. And this time I was indeed very surprised. Everything about the technical image quality is, well, nothing to get excited about. When it comes to the dynamic range, well, it loses the highlights very easily. The blacks are kinda not so interesting either. The colors are bland. The resolution is sort of okay for 2 megapixels, but I've seen much better 2 megapixel cameras than this. Now, that being said, some of the photos do actually have a very interesting atmosphere to them. Like this photo, for example, has a very liminal atmosphere. So just because the technical image quality is bad, it doesn't mean you cannot make interesting photos with it. Something is very weird about this camera, because now and then I got twisted and bent and warped photos. A very weird effect, and some of the photos even look a bit like some fever dreamish AI creations because of this. Did I actually happen to find a cursed or haunted camera? Well, it's not quite that exciting. There's a very simple explanation for these photos. It kind of looks like they were shot with a scanner, and well, scanning is actually what's happening here, because this camera has a CMOS sensor and not a CCD sensor, like commonly on pocket cameras from that time. A CMOS sensor basically scans the scene. It reads and writes sequentially each pixel on the sensor, kind of like a computer screen but in reverse. If the camera moves before the whole sensor has been read, you get these weird wiggly effects. And you can see it from, let's say, video, when you shake the camera or you film from a driving car. You can see this effect quite clearly on some cameras. Unlike a CCD sensor, which basically has a global shutter and it charges the whole sensor and then it reads it. So there you don't get this effect, but since the CMOS has this rolling shutter effect, and if they're very, let's say, cheap CMOS sensors like in this one, you kind of get some interesting side effects. Well, in any case, this pretty much makes the camera unusable. You have no idea what you will get when you press the shutter button. So in other words, this camera is complete garbage, but before I go and throw it into the trash, I will take some more photos with it. After all, it can be quite fun to use a camera which is completely unpredictable. You never know what kind of results you'll get out of it. This viewfinder is so dark, but it can be made a little bit brighter from the menu. Now actually I see something. This is the scene in front of me. I don't know how this camera will render it, but could be quite interesting. What is there to photograph here? Well, rocks and trees, and more rocks and trees. Not so much happening in nature at this time of the year. There are some, let's say, scene modes or settings you can change. What scenes do we have here? Party, night landscape, fireworks. I don't know. I think I'm going for either a party or fireworks. I think party I need. This landscape needs some excitement, I think. How will the party look like? More trees, and this screen is so dark. I know I'm saying it a million times, but really it makes it so difficult to see what you're doing. Okay, well, it does have a viewfinder, so I really want to shoot something else than trees and rocks. Well, I should not have come to the forest in that case. I have to say it's really frustrating using this camera. You can barely see what you're doing. Also, checking the photos doesn't help so much because the screen is so dark. Yeah, I think this is enough for this camera for this time. I will check the photos at home and see what I ended up with, and I will continue shooting with some of the other cameras I'm having with me and hope I can find some more interesting subjects. This forest this time of the year is really difficult to make some interesting photos. But yeah, thank you for watching and see you in my next video. Bye!